Spartacus is the leader in a legendary war. Gladiators, slaves, freedom fighters. They come out of nowhere and challenge the great armies of Rome, the ancient world's greatest power, and defeat them. Not once, but 9 times. Rome needs to throw away its training manual with its rigid rules of engagement, fight a new kind of war, a more nimble war, learn about counterinsurgency to deal with an enemy that just melts into the landscape. This is the story of Spartacus, Gladiator War. Capua, Italy, 73 BC, a breakout. A gang of 70 or more escaped gladiators, trained killers, loose in the Roman countryside. They'll grow into the most dangerous internal threat ever faced by Rome. Their leader is Spartacus. His name a byword for selfless bravery in the face of unbeatable odds.
Spartacus is the rebel. He is the liberator. He is the hero who fights against the empire.
Gladiators are heroes to the crowd, but also reviled as outcasts, the lowest of the low. They're slaves, forced to be entertainers, trained to kill for the amusement of the crowd. They're adored by women, mobbed in the streets. Throughout Rome's conquered lands, thousands upon thousands flock to arenas to watch as trained gladiators fight each other to the death and even battle wild animals. Gladiators are relentlessly drilled in carefully planned moves, like fencers today, learning lunges, parries, fast footwork, all the moves of attack and defense. Everything that will create a superstar. All for that brief moment in the spotlight when they'll live or die in front of the roaring crowd. Trainee gladiators start out lunging at straw-filled sacks, then at each other, trained not to blink at any threat. Like every other gladiator, Spartacus is drilled to perfection. Training he'll come to use with deadly effect. The Capua Gladiator School is notorious for its cruelty. Like a prison camp, the men guarded night and day, often kept in chains, lest they fight their way out. Here, criminals condemned to death, prisoners of war, and slaves like Spartacus are beaten into professional fighting machines. The first accounts of Spartacus tell us he's a slave, a piece of Roman property, powerless, in shackles, one of millions. About 1/3 of Rome's population are slaves. To own slaves is to be rich.
50,000 people here, 100,000 people there, 150,000 people here. For the Romans, slaves are simply human beasts of burden or living tools.
And this is one of Rome's richest slave owners, Marcus Licinius Crassus.
He is haughty, he is arrogant, and he can afford literally to buy legions. He can set them up. He can make and break other politicians, and that makes him enormously important.
Crassus owns farms where slaves outnumber the free many times over. A sharp operator, always maneuvering for money, power, and glory. He starts out by buying up the devalued estates of men who've fallen out of favor. He buys and sells slaves. He has silver mines. He's the man Rome will ultimately turn to destroy Spartacus and his rebel army of gladiators and slaves. History tells us Spartacus was born around 100 BC in Thrace, now covered mainly by present-day Bulgaria. It's an unstable territory on the outer fringes of the Roman world, peopled by warring tribes. But Spartacus isn't born a slave. He's born free. And he'll always be driven by the dream of returning home. Once he was a Roman soldier, part of the system. He's carried the Roman shield, wielded the Roman dagger, flexed the Roman sword, fought Rome's special kind of war with its rigid rules of engagement. Many young men in lands conquered by Rome willingly fight in Rome's armies, hoping to win their freedom. Provincial troops used to defend the frontiers of a vast and unruly territory.
I think he joined the army because that's what poor Thracians do. It was an opportunity for him. And because he was asked to march against his own people, he said, no, I'm not doing this, and he deserted.
Desertion is the unthinkable. The Roman punishment for desertion is slavery. Spartacus and his wife are captured. They've been roped neck to neck, hands tied behind their backs, whipped and beaten as they march, packed into the hold of a dark and dirty cargo ship, and dragged 1,000 miles from their homeland to Rome to be auctioned off in its slave markets. Yet Spartacus won't be any ordinary slave. He's sold to a gladiator school in Capua, 125 miles south of Rome. He'll be trained to become an instinctive killer.
The way you instill the will to kill is through training. So it doesn't feel like they're actually doing something out of the ordinary. But when choosing a gladiator, there's something else. There's an X factor that you need. It's some quality inside the individual that drives them to do the unspeakable.
In Capua, Spartacus finds a soulmate in Crixus, who comes from Gaul, present-day France. They eat, sleep, and train with 200 other men. They pledge to bind themselves body and soul to their owner and to endure branding, chains, flogging, or death by the sword if they disobey an order. They're taught to face death without fear. And the possibility that in the arena, in front of thousands of screaming spectators, one will kill the other.
Within any close-knit group of people who are being held against their will, there will be a kind of bonding within those people. But also there'll be an aspect of biding your time. All the time there's information gathering going on.
Beneath Rome's fascination with gladiators lies a huge fear that they might escape and terrorize the country. That fear is accompanied by a fatal blind spot which Spartacus will brilliantly exploit.
I don't think that Rome is scared of her slaves because she assumes that she will be able to crush any servile revolt. Her citizens are free, the slaves are not. Free always prevail over the servile. That is a rule of nature as far as the Romans are concerned.
In Capua, escape can never be far from these men's minds. 73 BC, 200 of them plot an escape, but it's discovered. 70 or more go ahead anyway. They raid the kitchen, seizing whatever they can lay their hands on. Roasting spits, chopping knives. Every Roman's worst nightmare. Once out, they stumble on wagons carrying weapons destined for another gladiator school. They kill the local garrison sent to stop them and commandeer their better weapons. They flee into the countryside. Word soon gets out. The fugitive gladiators know they need a leader to face down Rome. There can only be one choice: Spartacus. Slaves flock to the rebel gladiators. 70 will become 100, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. To survive, they must live off the land. They spread out, stealing food, clothing, weapons. Spartacus and his fugitive mob are on the march.
They're going to organize themselves into a fighting mobile unit, and they're going to disappear off country.
Spartacus and his gladiator army head for Mount Vesuvius, 25 miles south of Capua. They take up position on the mountaintop and wait for Rome's reaction. News of the breakout reaches Rome's leaders. A bunch of escaped gladiators and slaves? Not a national emergency. Rome is invincible. Her conquests living proof she has no equal.
This is a local problem, a police action, not something we need to bestir ourselves about.
The slave to Roman citizen ratio is very high, 1 in 3, a ticking time bomb. Yet Rome's leaders seem remarkably relaxed. The Senate picks its man to get rid of this minor nuisance. Claudius Glaber, a second-tier leader with few qualifications for the job. He sets out with 3,000 men.
The Romans who are sent out against Spartacus are not seasoned legionaries. These are raw recruits. These are at best rookies on the police force, and they're the ones who have been charged with fighting these gladiators.
It's a 150-mile march south to Mount Vesuvius. Rome's crack professional legions are far away fighting real wars. Wars of foreign conquest. Spain, Greece, Judea, Syria. On top of Mount Vesuvius, Spartacus and his gladiator army are waiting. There's only one narrow path up, which means there's only one way down. Claudius Glaber knows this. He sets up his camp at the base of the mountain and guards the path, convinced he has these rebel slaves cornered.
He's so confident he doesn't bother to fortify his camp. This is a major sin in Roman military thinking.
But Spartacus knows there's another way down the volcano, a steep cliff to the rear of Glaber's camp. Night falls. Glaber and his troops sleep. Spartacus orders his men to weave ropes out of wild vines on the mountain. They climb down and sneak up from behind.
You'd have had gladiators used to hand-to-hand combat, taking on these Romans who are used to fighting in open squares, in formation. It was no contest.
The rebel gladiators defeat Glaber's unwary, ill-trained soldiers and steal everything in the Roman camp, especially the much-prized Roman weaponry. Spartacus and his victorious followers celebrate exchanging their makeshift clubs and daggers for real Roman weapons. What Rome till now has seen as a ragtag mob of escaped gladiators and slaves has trounced a Roman army for the first time. The gladiator army is just 150 miles from Rome.
This is a wonderful gesture of defiance. He is saying, look, I can take this away from you whenever I like.
Word spreads beyond Vesuvius all over southern Italy. Rome isn't invincible. She can be beaten. Slaves run away from their owners. Shepherds abandon their animals. The 70 or so gladiators are now vastly outnumbered by men who've never fought a battle in their lives. thousands of slaves speaking many languages. Thracians, Gauls, Germans. Captives taken from wherever Rome has triumphed. Like Spartacus, all exhilarated at the prospect of throwing off their chains. And they have professional warriors, gladiators, as teachers. Spartacus now leads tens of thousands of men on the run, maybe 70,000. And he's responsible for their fate. Spartacus wants to head north for the Alps. His dream is to return home to Thrace, where he was born. But he knows Rome stands in his way. Spartacus knows he'll have to outthink the Romans and outfight them.
Spartacus doesn't have much choice except to fight dirty. They're going to attack when they don't expect it, where they don't expect it.
But even equipped with stolen Roman weapons, Spartacus knows the only way they can defeat the world's mightiest power is to fight a hit-and-run war. They can never win facing Romans head-on.
He was particularly good at what we might call today unconventional warfare, or even to a certain degree, guerrilla warfare.
In skirmish after skirmish, the army of gladiators and slaves faces down Rome's legions, led by the gladiator Spartacus. The Spartacus of myth is a slave who comes from nowhere. But Rome forgets he was a Roman soldier. He knows how Rome's armies fight. Well-ordered warfare with well-ordered legions facing the enemy on the battlefield.
He's going to be able to understand the mentality of the Roman soldier. He's going to understand their tactics. He's going to understand their equipment. And he's going to know how to use that against them.
Spartacus will fight them in a way they won't know how to counter. He can pick his battles, choose rough terrain where it's impossible to deploy large formations, spring out of nowhere, melt back into nowhere. A classic insurgency for which the Romans have no fighting manual. Rome sends out Verinius and his troops, 4,000 men. They surround the gladiator army. Once more, Spartacus must think outside the box. He tells his men to dress corpses and give them weapons. They place a row of stakes at the entrance to their camp and tie the corpses to them. From a distance, they look just like sentries. When night falls, the gladiator army creeps away. At dawn, the Romans know something's wrong when they don't hear the insults the rebels usually hurl at them. The Romans realize they've been tricked, again, by mere slaves and gladiators. Tens of thousands slip away to freedom. Now the Romans grow more fearful. They've been defeated once, twice, 3 times and more. They face an insurgency, but they have no counterinsurgency doctrine. They need a new mindset to respond to an improvised guerrilla campaign. A different sort of war. Spartacus the gladiator and his ever-growing army of rebellious slaves are getting the better of the ancient world's greatest power, Rome. Rome's soldiers are dying, felled by Rome's lowly slaves, a humiliating death. Freedom is contagious. There have been 2 slave revolts before, in Sicily. But the Romans are still hampered by their blind spot. Crack troops aren't needed to put down slaves.
Above all, the reason that generals don't come forward and say, right, let's sort this out, is that there is absolutely no honor in defeating a slave. There is honor in defeating foreign armies, that's fine. But at this stage, Spartacus is not seen anything like as that status.
Rome's leaders seem to forget that there are trained gladiators among the rebels, and a leader who's fought with Rome's armies. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months. The fugitive gladiators and slaves slip away every time. Rome's armies just keep on losing. Romans run away, refuse to fight, terrified of facing trained gladiators in the field. Spartacus and his rebel army force one commander to flee the battlefield without his horse, a huge disgrace. And the commander Cosinius meets the ultimate fate. North in the Alps and beyond in Thrace, where Spartacus was born, winter is drawing in. His dream of going north and home evaporates. Thousands are still joining him.
I think the motive for people joining Spartacus was the dream of freedom. Each success made that more likely.
Less than 100 gladiators are now an army 100,000 strong. An army bigger than anything Rome has fielded. The gladiator army goes south to spend the winter near Thorii. Spartacus seems to be something unique in the ancient world. He shares the plunder with his followers.
You've got a leader who's actually dividing the spoils equally amongst his men. And that's really refreshing to hear that in history. And that's one of the things that's very appealing to us now, I believe. There seems to be a genuine feeling for equality about him.
Spartacus isn't just a cold-blooded killing machine. He has a following the size of a small city.
The larger the army, the bigger the problems of actually keeping them alive. In Spartacus, I think we're talking about a true leader. He has that ability to understand strategy rather than tactics. It's off the battlefield stuff as well as on the battlefield stuff. So the whole clothing and feeding of his army, this becomes something that he does, and he seems to do it very well.
They also need to replenish their supply of weapons, organize, train. Spartacus knows that when spring comes, they'll have to fight their way north. Just having Roman weapons won't be enough. They need to learn to fight like Romans. A day will come when hit-and-run warfare will no longer be an option.
I think Spartacus organizes his troops by delegation. I think he takes his core gladiators, he takes these 70 men, and he instills in them what is necessary to train the rest. I think what Spartacus is creating with his army is another Roman army, because that's all he knows.
But it's still one motley army versus the world's superpower.
In Spartacus's mind, somewhere he has to know that someday those veteran legions that are now in Spain and Greece and Judea and Syria are going to come back to put down this revolt, and then it will be an entirely different game.
The Roman leadership may be mired in old thinking, but the time will come when they'll realize their folly. Spartacus must be ready for that time. But training creates a new problem: overconfidence. Crixus, the gladiator who's been with Spartacus since the beginning, has become a thorn in his side.
Romanos, neki dare, volomus. Aurum, fugimus. Feminas, cupimus. Non sumus ignavi.
Crixus and his followers have no fear of tackling Rome's legions head-on. They're not interested in going home, in freedom. Spartacus finally loses control of Crixus.
Essentially, what split them apart was that Crixus was thinking short-term, and Spartacus, I feel, was thinking longer-term.
Crixus breaks away, taking thousands of men with him, not realizing their best hope for staying alive rests with Spartacus.
We know that when Spartacus marches north in 72 BC, that Crixus and his men, perhaps as many as 30,000 men, don't come with him. They stay in the south. That's a significant loss.
When spring comes, Spartacus gathers his depleted army.
What Spartacus wants to do is go home. Going home is what this revolt is all about. He proposes to take this army and to march through the length of the Italian peninsula, through hostile territory, and then to cross the Alps and to scatter home. This is no mean undertaking.
The Italian peninsula is 700 miles from end to end. Spartacus and his gladiator army are once more on the move. Maybe 70,000 men. North, in the direction of Rome. Rome's had enough of this pesky rebel horde, the humiliation of defeat by lowly gladiators and slaves. Rome sends out the big guns, its biggest offensive yet. Crixus and his breakaway army head toward the coast.
Whether the Romans knew that this split had happened, we don't know. It's entirely feasible. The Romans were an incredibly organized people after all, and they may well have timed that to perfection, knowing that with Spartacus's command split, that would make their life so much easier.
Rome dispatches 2 legions, nearly 10,000 men. Headed by Gellius Publicola and Cornelius Lentulus, both consuls in Rome and leaders of the city. This is Spartacus's worst fear. Lentulus heads out to block Spartacus. Further south, Publicola hounds Crixus mercilessly. Crixus may be a brave warrior, but he's not a great general. He'll face well-disciplined Roman legions head-on. Publicola attacks him near Mount Garganus. Crixus doesn't stand a chance. It's not the glorious gladiator death before the roaring crowd. No chance to seek a thumbs up that he might live. This is the first Roman success against the gladiator army. Then, both Roman armies set their sights on Spartacus and his rebels. Spartacus has maneuvered his army into the Apennine Hills.
This is one of the most astonishing moments in his story, because I think the Romans still expect him to run. They expect him to retreat before them, and he doesn't. He actually comes out fighting.
When Spartacus attacks, Lentulus and his troops meet their match. Spartacus trounces them. Then the gladiator army sets its sights on Gellius. Spartacus is triumphant. He captures all the Roman weapons. Yet one more defeat for Rome. Spartacus and his gladiator army are now a huge thorn in Rome's side. They, not Rome, seem invincible. Months and months of fighting, hundreds of miles of marching, playing cat and mouse with Rome. Spartacus and his army push north to Mutina, present-day Modena. Rome's governor there is waiting with thousands of troops. He barely escapes with his life. The gladiator army is now in the foothills of the Alps. Spartacus's dream is within reach. They can almost touch freedom.
Spartacus achieves the extraordinary. And the only thing standing between him and freedom are the snow-covered Alps.
The split from Crixus, all the bloodshed, the months and months of hardship, they've all been about this one moment. But one great army stands between Spartacus and his dream, his own. Once again, the Gauls and Germans who've stayed with him thus far refuse to take the final step to freedom.
He couldn't take the army with him. They didn't want to go. At that point, it feels like he's failing.
Given the choice between freedom and plunder, his army chooses plunder, gold, and women.
Spartacus, the leader, not just of a rabble, not just a killing machine, not just a general, but a man who really does care about his people. And they have expectations of him. And he feels duty-bound to stay with them, to continue in that role as their leader.
The die is cast. Spartacus and his gladiator army will march back south, into the mouth of the enemy, Rome. Late 72 BC, Spartacus and his gladiator army have spent more than a year challenging Rome. The rebel gladiator who dreams of going home to Thrace is defied by his own men. They want to stay in Italy, even at the risk of facing Rome head-on. Ever loyal to his followers, once more, Spartacus will march his army back south through Italy, putting them on a collision course with the greatest power on earth. South lies Rome.
At the point where Spartacus is persuaded to return back into Italy, I think there's an air of inevitability about his failure. He was going back into the lion's mouth, and I think there was an air of doom about what was about to happen.
The Roman Senate is horrified at the unending string of defeats it has suffered at the hands of Spartacus and his rebel army, mere slaves and gladiators. How can the most powerful army in the world, with the best soldiers in the world, not defeat a rabble? Rome is at long last hit by a massive wave of fear. The gladiator army is on its way, maybe 100,000 men, armed with Roman weapons, but not fighting the Roman way. The Senate appoints Marcus Licinius Crassus to lead its largest force yet against Spartacus, with legions that can conquer whole countries. His moment has come. Crassus isn't a fabled general, but he's rich and hugely ambitious.
Crassus is hailed by those who know him as the most intimidating, the most powerful man in Rome. And almost everything that is written about him testifies to, if not his charisma, then his menacing and intimidating allure.
For one of Rome's wealthiest citizens, this is a chance for glory. He knows that for the man who saves Rome, there will be honor and status. He once declared, a man isn't truly wealthy unless he can buy his own army. The Senate gives him the 4 legions that have already been in the field. He pays for another 6 out of his own pocket. Nearly 40,000 experienced soldiers.
Spartacus and Crassus couldn't be more different. Spartacus has a humanitarian streak that shines out through history at us, whereas Crassus was self-serving, an aristocrat, incredibly wealthy, and a bully.
Rome has no idea what Spartacus's intentions are. Attack Rome? The rebel army is on its way south, but its goal isn't Rome. It never has been. Spartacus has a new plan up his sleeve. Crassus's legions must pursue an enemy constantly on the move. Spartacus still knows that all-out confrontation means instant death. Crassus takes a bet on the slaves turning tail as soon as he appears. He sends most of his men to block their escape route and sends his lieutenant Mummius with 2 legions to drive the slaves into his trap. He explicitly instructs Mummius not to fight a pitched battle, but Mummius ignores him. Many of his men throw away their weapons in a mad dash to escape. This gives Spartacus and his gladiator army time to move yet further south. He knows they're on the ropes. Spartacus's goal is Sicily,
only viable alternative I feel he's got at this point is to establish themselves somewhere in Italy where they remain as one.
Sicily is bandit country, a permanent hotbed of slave discontent. There have already been 2 rebellions there.
I get the impression that whatever plan Spartacus may have in mind, that this is the last throw of the dice here. He actually has nowhere else to go. There is an element of desperation in it.
When the rebel army reaches the coast, Spartacus falls in with some pirates. He wants to cross the 2-mile strait and land 2,000 men in Sicily. Start another slave revolt. The pirates take his gold and treasure, but the ships never come. Betrayed, Spartacus will lead his army way down into the toe of Italy. He knows Crassus can't be far behind. Spartacus and his fugitive followers will have their backs to the sea. They're back where they were a year ago. But times are different. Their options now are few. Crassus has them cornered.
He's showing that he's got the time, he's got the manpower, he's got the money to contain this man until he's going to kill him.
Spartacus has met his match. The Romans, superlative engineers, quickly build a wall and dig a ditch 15 feet wide and 35 miles long. A colossal undertaking. Crassus has the gladiator army trapped like rats. The wall in front, sea to the left and right of them. The 2 armies face each other across a no man's land. But Spartacus isn't beaten yet. He knows the value of psychology. He drags a Roman prisoner out into the no man's land and nails him to a cross.
Crucifixion is a punishment that is applied to slaves. Roman citizens are not crucified, and on the very, very rare occasions where we do hear of it happening, it is scandalous and shocking. So Spartacus is deliberately humiliating Rome by crucifying one of her soldiers, one of her citizens. It's not just an execution, it's a deliberate attempt to humiliate a superpower.
And it's a final rallying cry for his followers.
What this is a moment of utter defiance. Spartacus, I think, was almost certainly outnumbered by now. I think he knows that he can't win. It's only a matter of time. We're talking days, weeks at most. Somehow he has to break through those defenses. But he just wants to show his total contempt of the military machine that he's facing.
Despite the terrifying odds, Spartacus hasn't lost his smarts. He waits for a stormy night and orders his troops to bridge the ditch with branches and dirt. A third of his army crosses before Crassus realizes. Tens of thousands of rebels break through, but tens of thousands are left behind. Is the tide turning for Rome? Spartacus and his gladiator army head for Brundisium, present-day Brindisi. Then they're on their way north, toward Rome, yet again. The Senate is now truly alarmed. Spartacus and his gladiator army are fleeing north with Crassus in hot pursuit. But Spartacus can't hold his army together. The endgame is near. Early 71 BC, a new year. Spartacus and his gladiator army are heading toward Rome with Crassus on their heels. For over 2 years, Rome has failed to quell the slave rebellion. But time isn't on Spartacus's side. Men start to desert. He's been ever loyal to them, but not they to him. He's far from the Alps and his dream of going home. His dream of reaching Sicily crushed by betrayal. His followers now want to stand and fight. just what Crassus wants. The kind of war Romans know, not hit-and-run guerrilla war, but face-to-face on the battlefield. Spartacus must now fight on Rome's terms, not Rome on his. Spartacus the gladiator is trained to fight to victory or to death. He knows how to face death with courage. There will be no surrender. The gladiator army has ranged the length and breadth of Italy, sowing terror in Rome's world. Now it must prepare for victory or annihilation. Maybe 80,000 rebels versus 8 Roman legions, and at their head, Spartacus. They're near the river Salaris, not far from Capua, where the gladiator revolt started. Spartacus takes his horse, draws out his sword, and kills it, saying, "If we win, I'll have many horses to choose from. If we lose, I won't need one." Spartacus tries to fight his way to Crassus for the final duel, one-on-one. He's impossibly outnumbered. He kills 2 centurions. Ever the proud gladiator, he makes his last stand. But there's no roaring of the crowd in the arena. No adoring women, no trumpets sounding. No appeal to the crowd for mercy, no hope of freedom, no going home. The man who's led a rebel army 100,000 strong will never surrender. Spartacus's body is never found. Battle over, the dead are too many to count. Some say 30,000, some 60. The last survivors flee north. For Crassus, victory on the battlefield isn't enough. He crucifies his slave prisoners, all 6,000 of them. They're strung up along Rome's most important highway, the Appian Way, between Capua and Rome, 125 miles. Left for the vultures, the most dishonorable death imaginable. A warning to all would-be rebels.
Crassus wins the battle, but in a certain sense, Spartacus wins the war, because Spartacus is our hero today. We've all heard of Spartacus. He is a legend, whereas Crassus is most definitely an also-ran.
Never again can Romans trust their slaves. In times of social unrest, gladiators are deported from Rome and other cities for fear they might rebel again.
Spartacus is a great man. I can't think of any other way to put it. He is a leader for his own time and a leader for all times.
The enemy within is more threatening than the enemy without. If Crassus is remembered for anything, it's his wealth and greed. But the name of Spartacus resounds through history, a byword for bravery. An epic story of the underdog taking on the powerful, champion of the masses. A man who wants to live on his own terms, who dies fighting for freedom and justice. An eternal symbol of resistance to oppression everywhere.